How do we access the web? Well, I just mentioned that we type in a web address, a URL, a Uniform Resource Locator, into the web browser. But what happens with that? Well, that sends a request to a server. In other words, just another device somewhere in the world, that's why it's called World Wide Web, somewhere in the world which hosts this HTML, CSS, as well as other components of the web application or website, to then send that back so we can see the results of that at our end, the client end. This gives mention to the client and server architecture. We don't actually host all of the web pages associated with Amazon or Google or BBC or any other website out there at our local device. No, that's stored somewhere on a server in the world. So therefore, we have to send a request to that server to get that website, or actually see that website and actually send back the results so we can see it at our local device, whether that's a smartphone, whether that's a laptop, tablet, any device, you name it. And indeed, we've got some more represented here. So that is the client and server architecture. Let's see another example of this. So if, say, we were a user in Vancouver and we wanted to visit airindia.in, well, in this case, the IN domain indicates that this site, Air India, may well be hosted in India itself, in a server somewhere in India. I should add a note of caution that isn't always the case, but it might well be that that if, especially in a global company, airlines, and we just mentioned some tech companies, which obviously are spread all over the world, it might be that they delegate parts of their website, rather than having them in just one city and one country of the world, they're delegated all across the world to spread the demand and the load across the world, so that we don't have to have traffic flying all over the world. And often another part of this is that domains which are focused on a particular country obviously are then specialized for that country. India would then represent this global corporation in a way that's local to the dialect. Language is very important, obviously. So it indicates that we might expect to see this global company represented for Indian residents, let's say, or those who speak Hindi or Bengali or Urdu or any other language in that country. Furthermore, we see other examples as well. Qantas, global company, qantas.com.au. Well, again, com doesn't always mean that things are going to be located in America. I think it's VeriSign that actually manage the com domain names, which are located in America, the actual company VeriSign. But AU, again, allows a specialization, Australia, Sydney, of this global company, which it might well be true that these web pages that represent the Australian version of Qantas's website are located in Sydney. That might well be true. So it indicates that we can get to that representation of the websites through this address. Another example here of Google.com, San Francisco. Well, that makes sense because Google headquarters is at Silicon Valley in San Francisco, so it is probably likely that they host the website there. But of course, Google is a global entity, so they are likely to have all the different expressions spread across the world for other countries. Indeed, us based here in the UK, or at least some of us might be, I certainly am, would go to google.co.uk, and there's likely that the website specialization is hosted here in the UK. And I think I've got one more. Here we go. So Sony, again, is a global entity, but may well have a Japanese representation of that in Tokyo. So it indicates that it's worldwide, and the domain usually would indicate that even if it's not stored directly in that country, we should expect to see the representation of that in a local context. So we expect to see the Japanese version of Sony as a corporation. Just mentioned that language is important, and indeed, as we are dealing with many different dialects and languages represented over the world, now obviously there would have to be specialization of those pages in those countries. So let's just recap and cover how exactly the mechanics of this work. Well, first of all, we do need an internet service provider. It's something that's easily overlooked because it's something we probably all signed up for years ago and probably forgot about. But to actually get onto the internet, you would need to have a connection provided by a company, an internet service provider, to be able to access websites across the world. So examples of that here in the UK might be Virgin, BT Internet, TalkTalk. BT, obviously here in the UK, own most of the lines, the actual physical lines to connect devices together, and a lot of other companies actually are based on that physical connection. They lease the lines, so we would need, if we were at home, or at least our place of work, our business, our company, whatever you work, would need a connection provided by an internet service provider. So that needs to be in place first, and then once that's in place and we load up a web browser, examples of those might be Chrome, Firefox, Edge, or any others that you might use. Those, once we type in a URL, that is obviously typed in terms of letters, so amazon.co.uk or google.com, sony.jp, but that has to be translated into numbers. So that is then when that request is sent to a DNS server. And again, if that's happening in the UK, that's going to be based locally, these domain name servers. And they would translate that, English in our case, because we're in the UK, they would translate that English URL into an IP address, which is a series of numbers, for both the historic version of IP as well as IP version. The four parts to it: the network ID, for example, 192.168, which is the subnet ID, and then .0 and .1, which are the host ID and the broadcast ID. So they have 4 parts for IP version 4. And that may give some indication as to where the server is located in the world. Obviously, that can be obscured through virtual private networks, VPNs, but the IP addresses are the actual server, and that which will host the pages that we are looking for. So the DNS handles all of that for us. We don't have to remember the specific IP address of the company, and indeed sometimes they change as well, so we don't have to remember that ourselves. We only have to remember the specific website that we're looking for. Not even that, we can just type that into Google and that will find it for us, of course, but the main point is that domain name service is simply a collection of servers which translates our URL into numbers, which refer to the IP address, which allows us to locate the server somewhere in the world which holds the web pages that we are seeking to find. Okay, so if, for example, we're looking for a site and we type that in, that's then translated by the DNS servers. It so happens that the web page we're looking for is hosted on a server that exists in Paris. The domain name servers would then connect us to this server, in this case held in Paris, so that we can send a request to that server to try and access that website. Okay, and providing that all goes to plan, that request is received at the server end, and then providing we are granted the access to a certain web page, if it's the home page, we probably will be. Obviously, login details are handled separately, but to get to the home page at least, that should be fairly easy to access. So that can then be sent back to us. That can then be sent back, which brings us right back to what we said at the start, the HTML, the CSS, the structure of the web page, so we can actually see the front page in front of us at our local device, even though it's located. And actually those files are actually stored somewhere else in the world. Okay, so that's the process in a nutshell for the World Wide Web.